Okay, that's incredible. Michiel, what do you think about it?
I think it's a big game changer because indeed we see a lot of companies they start out with liquid as they're a small company and they grow as the business grow. Also their needs grow, and I think as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation about the different kind of tools that you want to implement. If you're inside of a monolith, it's difficult to have those experimentations or try out new tools that are specifically needed for your business use case. Having the option to go from one system and going into the headless system and have all of the flexibility, it's going to be a big game changer.
Hi, Michiel and Michal. Thanks for joining the Dear Digital podcast. Introduce both of yourselves. Maybe first, Michal, go ahead. Who are you?
So thank you for having me here. So I'm Michael. I'm CTO at Commerce UI, a boutique e-commerce development agency. A bit of a history how I get here basically. I entered the tech industry around 15 years ago. Not so super early, around my 20s. So my background there then was more on the visual side of things. I went studying cultural studies and to the arts university, and quickly became interested into tech, mainly front end development. I just wanted to create things that I designed, and it's just catched on. And the more years passed, the more I became more developer than a designer. So I started from freelancing and doing as much stuff as I can by myself. I didn't care so much about networking and so on. Just toying with the idea of having my own business there, but I wasn't so much ready for it. So I took more regular path or more conservative path and just started to working for various companies like software houses, SaaS products, big enterprise companies, and so on. And yeah, the years passed. I got a lot of experience on these different companies or different types of companies.
Did you learn everything yourself? Or how did that go? Because I'm always interested in how people transition from one job, which actually didn't have to do anything with code, to being more a code-based developer.
Yeah, good question. So I definitely started learning by myself. Everything was in the web, and generally speaking, learning web development is like the nicest things that you can learn. I think there's just so much knowledge laying around everywhere, and everybody is so helpful. You don't even have to know them; you just start asking questions. So yeah, to some extent by myself, but that wouldn't make it justice, basically. So community definitely. But yeah, I have to admit that the real progress I made was after I joined or took the regular path. So the first years were more about personal growth, knowing it's more about client services, how to talk how to talk about the projects, development project, and so on. But the real development progress was made by me when I joined those companies. So I started from a software house and got lucky there because I had the option to join very different projects and very many different projects using different technologies, React, Angular. We even made some projects in web components back in the day. So I had a chance to see a lot of different technologies, but also different setups, how you can manage teams and so on and so on. So I progressed more toward, or pivoted more towards after that more towards managing teams or leading teams, and I found that route very very. It brings me a lot of satisfaction, basically. So, setting up the processes, setting up the best practices, some maybe more on a developer advocate side of things, also, and so
Then
on.
a big journey then from like more the visual side to the coding side to the management side. It's like the whole cycle.
Yeah,
Quite extreme.
yeah, definitely. I had this thing. I was doing some recruit, and I got this candidate was really good. And there's this time at the end of the end of the meeting where I'm asking, okay, what's your questions there? And he said, I've got only one. How did you get to the tech when you were on the arts university, basically? So it's always a topic.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, it is interesting, the journey. So yeah, maybe Michiel, you can pitch in a bit as well because yeah, you have a similar journey, more or less.
Yes, I always have been as well very interested in more the visual side of things, but was happy to be able like to make them in a way real while I was like learning development. Um, so it's always like the combination of like being very creative on the one side, but being able to solve like solutions with more like the technical side of things. And indeed, I've been a developer for the biggest part of my professional career. And then the last few years, I've been also more moving into managing teams and nowadays building more bridges between the client and like the internal development teams and helping out with like the processes like business wise to indeed have like good flows internally, the way we work and uh, I guess to make great work in the end. So
Cool.
yes.
Thanks. So, Michal, you're the CTO of Commerce UI. So you joined them more or less 2 years ago. How did you get into contact with those guys? What were they doing before that? And which role did you exactly, or are you actually doing as a CTO?
All right. Yes. So yeah, as I've mentioned, I went through different different companies on my career path, and I had this notion that in order to progress, I need to go to more into the enterprise level companies. So I progressed that, and I was looking for bigger and more quote unquote serious companies. So at that time, I was working for a bank and basically leading the software engineers. That there wasn't so much distinction between front end and back end. I definitely was more about this visual part or UX part and so on, and basically leading the guild inside the organization that was taking care of those parts of things. But I slowly grew tired of it. So as my as I mentioned, I also I always very much like the visual part and the UX part of how things work. So I wouldn't say they didn't care about that, but there just wasn't so much space around it. So of course we wanted to do a very good product and very enterprise product, but uh, basically you have to go through all of those security checks if you can use that framework or you can do that and so on and so on. So you have to be very strict about what you're doing. Uh, so yeah, I definitely needed a change at that point, and wanted to move a bit more swift. And it happens that I live in Gdańsk, Poland, and my co-founders, Andrew, Marcin, and Simon, are also living in Gdańsk, and the commerce UI is based in Gdańsk. So yeah, maybe I circle a bit and add the story about the commerce UI, because commerce UI was initially set as an agency, not the e-commerce agency, just an agency by Andrew and Marcin, and they mixed design approach with a development approach. And at that time, it wasn't uh, that usual approach, I would say. So they created the agency. They worked with great design studios. They cared very much about the UX UI, and quickly they noticed that the market that really appreciate all they cared about is the e-commerce. So alongside Simon joined, and some time ago, here we are. I'm at the bank, and they are invested into their own startup. Like they building this great embeddable visual builder for that embeddable into the CMSs basically called Shop Story. And yeah, they're thinking what's next. So we are investing in that, which is basically very close to the e-commerce to what the agency doing. And we met by accident and we talked. It turns out that we share a common vision, definitely when it comes to quality, UI, UX, what we want to achieve, what's the role of the development agency in the whole, the whole setup. Yeah, maybe more about that later. And yeah, basically we've met a couple of times. We talked a lot, and they offered me generous equity package and said, "Okay, you can be a CTO." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." I had to discuss this with my partner, and basically done a leap of faith. So, and yeah, I'm happy. I'm here, and I'm very happy I've done this and went this route basically.
Awesome. Wow. That's a crazy journey actually. It's cool. So we got to know you guys because I think my co-founder John knew you guys already. I think more Simon because of the app that you guys also have, like or the what is the name of it again? Sorry, I forgot.
Shop Story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think he just passed through it on the internet and just looked up you guys because he's quite good at these kinds of research and stuff. But I think it was a Netlify webinar where you guys talked about AETHER, which is a big American apparel brand. I think it's a bit maybe more than just apparel, or maybe they just make everything from shoes to like clothes. And how did you come into contact with them? And how did the deal or the collaboration come along?
Yeah, so actually they've approached us. So Evan, the designer and consultant in the AETHER apparel, basically they were looking for a site refurbishing. So, and he was looking for the agencies, and basically he stumbled upon a case study of our older project Magda Butrum, and he went to Magda Butrum's site and he said, "Okay, that's a really fast site. It's a really detail oriented site and so on. And I want to talk with these guys." So we've met and started talking. We also started hearing what issues they have, what pain points they have, and AETHER Apparel is this premium outdoor brand, and they're built solely on the community basically. So they build their brand by gathering or by creating a community around them. They going to the rallies together, to motorcycle rallies, skis rallies, and so on. And storytelling is something that was very important for them. So on top of that, we can add that the founders are basically coming from film making industry, and they're all about videos and starring.
Yeah, you see that when you're on the website, right? I mean, it's incredible the amount of videos and the crazy images. It's just stunning. Yeah, it's quite incredible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. So we heard that, and basically we were finishing one project where we felt that for the first time we tackled this very very good. So we basically created our own like an accelerator project around it, and we were able to show them what are the possibilities. So they have had the combination of a Shopify Liquid store with a WordPress, and basically to achieve any storytelling, they've done a lot of, let's call it, hacks, and they struggled to experiment with content. They struggled with updating the content and so on. So and we show them how it can look like. Mm, how what One thing is how the site could be performant, and another thing is what kind of freedom they could have in terms of editing experience. And yeah, they liked it. We kicked off the project, and yeah, here we are. Um,
Awesome. Can you just say a bit more about, so they were on Shopify already. We're just going to talk a bit about how you guys got in touch with Shopify or why you are building on Shopify in a minute. But so why did they create the initial Liquid Shopify setup plus WooCommerce? I mean, not a WooCommerce, but yeah, why did they combine both of those two things? Why didn't they just do it all in Liquid back in those days?
Uh, yeah, I don't know the exact story, why they went this route, but they've been on Shopify for quite some time. So I believe it has something to do with online store 1.0 not being that editorial
Yeah.
friendly. So they went with WordPress, and then the technological debt
Yeah.
increased and increased. So
So they were maybe looking for like like a yeah a customizer, like we know it now in Shopify, right? But they didn't really find that to be very dynamic and in Shopify back in the days when it was just online store 1.0, and that's why they went for it. Okay, interesting, cool.
yeah, and basically, I think the depends on where you are. Shopify makes a lot of sense as a platform, or even at the beginning, or later on when you progressed. And still, Liquid is, I would say, very relevant up to this day as a way of building shops. Basically, Shopify ecosystem is great. So and they've already used Shopify also in a physical store. So they were using the Shopify post. So it was only natural for them to stay on the platform, but they just wanted a new experience, basically.
Okay, cool. And so then you proposed the whole headless setup directly, because that was before the online store 2.0 paradigm also, or was it after?
No, it was very much after, but still, they were all about great media content, so images, videos, and so on, and they were all about performance. So, and we felt like, and we had a good examples of that on Handless Build. So we proposed that and our accelerator, and definitely we were also talking about more about their future, what they want to achieve, what kind of integrations they want to achieve, if they are going global, and so on. And there wasn't like a concrete plan that we can follow, but we definitely saw a vision there. So okay, yes, we want to expand, we want to create new features, new integrations. We have so many ideas around how to engage our community, and we felt like the headless architecture is right for them because of the flexibility and future proofness, I would say, at this point. And we were quite sure that this brand um, will be yeah, basically, sorry, I lost the word here. Yeah, we'll take out the best out of it, basically. So yeah.
So maybe we can just, because a lot of our listeners, they already know the term headless. They already probably know the term CMS a bit. They know why, or they think to know why you would go headless or could go headless. But maybe just explain as easy as possible which setup you then created and on which big pillars that solution like leans. How is that headless setup, and why maybe you can infuse like why we call it headless as a term, as a concept, and then indeed specifically dive into the whole setup that you have created for Ether. And maybe also that would be interesting to know, have you doubted different technologies, or indeed did you already create a solution before and you really thought like, okay, this is the ideal solution for them as well from what we hear at this point in time? Or were there still some parts during the discussion when you were engaging with them where you said, oh, maybe this setup or this tool would be good or better to introduce as well? So maybe where I'm trying to get at, like, how flexible are these tools and setups, and how easy is it to make them broader for a specific use case like Ether versus the other case that you had. So maybe just dive into those very broad but topics first, so that we can make a bit of a framework for the people to understand where we then will be diving into a bit more specifically.
All right. All right. So maybe I will start from the what is headless, basically. What does it mean? So in a nutshell, it's about disconnecting the backend or the data side of things from the visual part of the whole experience, or the front end, how we call it. And basically, historically, the monolithic system were more about having everything inside the platform. So you build, so the same how you build the liquid shops. So you build those inside the platform. You don't really choose your tools there. You write in the technology provided. Whereas when you detach those things, you can basically start picking and choosing. So I want this as a front-end framework. I want this service as a search, and I want this CMS as my headless CMS. And the so the headless term is I think quite old at this point. Maybe I think in another industries, like headless is a standard thing. Like in a lot of SaaS companies, like, okay, we have an API, we have to consume it and render it through React or Angular. It's like is a status quo. Actually, you don't think about this at all. Whereas in e-commerce, it's quite, there is still a lot of discussion: should we go liquid or headless? And basically, but it's also combining with this composable term. So for me, headless is something, or detaching those to the visual part from the data part, backend part, is basically is a way to achieve composability. So you have to have the front end detached from the whole system to be able to use different systems or different tools for different tasks. And that's what's basically, that's a big advantage of the headless architecture. So it's flexible, it's future proof, and you can pick and choose. Depends on where you are with your business development and your needs. On the downside, you have to have much more know-how, how to set it up, how to connect all of those different systems, all of those different endpoints. You have to maintain those because you are working with couple of different companies, couple of different products, and their APIs change, their approach change, and you at some point you have to somehow accommodate those changes in your store. Over the last couple of years, I would say that the whole ecosystem, especially on Shopify side of things, is going very mature, and it's not as scary as it was before. So yeah, that's about headless. And when it comes to Ether, I think there was no doubt. They drew a big vision before us, and we were pretty much sure. Okay, that's where we have to go, because quickly they will hit the wall with uh, without the headless architecture. So and right now we are developing very advanced features, I would say, like advanced searching, indexing, different types of content to Algolia, showing it all at once with different tools and so on. Very different discount logic for different customer segments and so on. And right now we feel like we have very much a future-proof solution. And from their side, there are, so we were their only technological resource, basically, or this is generally the model that we try to work with the client. So we serve more as a technological partner rather, development force for hire or for hours. And we had a lot of discussions around that and around, the whole architecture, how we should go. But they basically totally entrusted us with this decision, and they said, okay, we want the same results as on Magda Bootrom in terms of UX and performance. And yeah, so that's how Magda is also built. So Magda side.
Cool.
So,
Yeah. Interesting. So maybe just like some name dropping, which services do you use in the composable setup? So in terms of CMS, you're using Sanity, right? Then you have next.js. I think next.js will be something that we dive into a bit further, because that's, for me at least, from my perspective, one of the very interesting topics to dive into in terms of the freedom that you create when you choose something like that. I mean, again, we're going to also dive into hydrogen from Shopify side of things, but I think that's like a big difference for people that don't need to know all the technical things. But I think that's like one point that you can just put in your mind, like if you use hydrogen or next.js, and we'll talk about the difference later again, and liquid or the monolithic approach, I think that this is already one point that you have to bear in the back of your mind. Like, okay, because you choose hydrogen or next.js, you actually create so much more potential freedom to do things with. Then the CMS system, again, also, I think that's a very, very interesting and important topic that you see come up more and more. I think in terms of like making sure that you have the content in one place and centralized, where you can push it to different kinds of stores for different locations, but also use that content in other places. For example, in stores or in screens in stores or in other places. I think for that kind of stuff, a CMS is just something that is irreplaceable and extremely important, actually, from a business point of view. While if you keep a lot of your content, which is obvious because your website has a lot of content, obviously, in Shopify, then it's a bit harder or impossible to use that content in other sales channels or in other places that are not typically extremely linked to Shopify, or not necessarily linked extremely to Shopify. So I think that's another like major point that why people could or should think about headless architectures. But then there are a list of like smaller components, I would say. Maybe they're very important in the user experience and people don't really recognize that. But those I just want to discuss also briefly, like which are those other types of components that you have been using in a composable way based on the APIs, right, that they have, because mostly that's how it's built, that you can get those services inside your user experience with the APIs. Which are the other very important services that you're using?
yeah, so I definitely you mentioned the most important ones. So Shopify, Sanity, Next.js. That is like a backbone of the whole architecture. So another would be hosting platform, basically like Netlify or Vercel. In case of Ether, it's Netlify, and it serves also, and it's somehow connected to to all of those other services. We need to be able to revalidate the content. We need to be able to rebuild, to act upon something happen inside one of those hosting platforms. There are a couple of more tools that we usually use. So whenever there's a need for more advanced searching or now recommendation engines, we tend to use Algolia. Usually for monitoring and observability, we are using Sentry in this case. And it's like a industry standard for marketing, email marketing. It's Klaviyo basically. So in case of Ether, there is also strictly business integrations like Loop for Turns. And yeah, I forgot one very much important because it integrates so well into the Sanity that I always take it as a part of Sanity, but it's Max. So Max is something that allows us to render those videos very, very efficiently.
Can you say something about that? Because I'm not really aware of those details. So why would you need a service to make sure that your videos, because that's actually a question that we get a lot, or something that people are thinking about a lot naturally, is like, okay, but I want to have a good website speed, obviously. But yeah, images versus videos. I mean, videos consume way more data and are just bigger, right? But we do still want to have the good quality. So where does a service like Mux come in? Why is that important? What does it do from a first principle standpoint? I mean, not going into too many technical details, but why do you need such a service, and why, yeah, do you have to plug it in?
All right. So depends on the CMS. There could be a video optimization pipeline included, basically. In Sanity, there is a great images pipeline included. It's totally the best one I saw up until that point. However, there's no video optimization, and that's where the Max comes in to the stage. And basically, it's a very developer friendly platform that allows to upload and automatically optimizes the video, and it does it in a way that developers could consume it very easily and could basically create very good UX in terms of UX video players. So it brings us video in different resolution, optimized very quickly. It brings us first frame, and it's generally very, very, very fast and very nice to work with. So it's not a big part of the project in terms of usage and so on, because uh, it doesn't play that big role in the whole maintenance setup and so on. But it plays a big role when it comes to to the whole site performance.
Yeah, because there are just so many videos, right? And it's just such a central part of the whole Ether setup. Yeah. So, I mean, when I would consume it on mobile, so for example, from a customer perspective, because for some merchants that's just easier to wrap their heads around, what does Mux do to make sure that that video is played in the best possible fashion on my mobile device? I'm walking from whatever, I'm walking on the streets. Well, what does it do? Why is it there? I mean, does it make sure that the quality is just diminished because it knows that I'm on 4G outside on this mobile phone, and it just like specifically serves me the video that is ideal for that device? Is that more or less the
Uh,
basic?
yeah, there are two ways of how you can use Max. So basically, you can stream the video, or you can just use the ready-made or made videos made by them or files made by them in MP4. And the streaming, yes, works like you've mentioned. It's automatically adjusting the video quality to the bandwidth and to your connection to the device you are using and so on. However, we didn't went that route, so we were worried about that. You will get this amazing video in a low quality and it will play as low quality the whole time. So we went with a different approach. So basically, we are not preloading the video at all. We're just showing the first frame, and of course some kind of an indicator that something is happening there, and we are waiting for a actually good resolution video. And what good resolution means depends on a device you're using. So, and that's what Max is giving us, those different options. And when it's ready to be played in a satisfactory quality, we are just playing it. And it's a similar approach to what Apple doing on their side. We very much like the UX there, and it allows. We thought that okay, it's better for user to wait for a video a bit and show it in a good quality, but because the resources there are really great, rather than showing maybe a blurry image, maybe with a so on. And that's and this kind of but basically the thing is that we had an option. We could think what would be the best approach for the client for this particular brand, and we could do that because of the Max. Another thing is that it integrates really well with Sanity. So it's a seamless plugin. So basically, from a tutorial point of view, you don't know you're using Max. It's just an developer API. And that's what we are trying to achieve generally with Sanity. And what Sanity allows us to do is at the end of the day, you as an editor, you don't want to think about that. You want to think about which video should I use for this type of content, how much video should be on the site, what should be the order, and so things like that. You want to experiment with the content, you want to change it. You don't want to think about this. Okay, how this video, what format should I put for this device and this and this and this. So that is something that we can solve and leave you a room for content editing actually. So
Cool.
Maybe go a bit back to the technology. I think it sounds like you had a very distinguished set of tools that you use today for building websites. Um, I'm also interested in like what kind of process do you have in place like to evaluate the kind of tools that you use and the software you use to achieve those things, and um, how does that like influence the projects that you build, like to make sure that every time the next project like you choose like the right tools for the job?
yeah, generally a good question. So when it comes to those backbones technologies like Shopify, Sanity, so Shopify at some point. So when we started going into the headless directory and building the headless site, uh, we were looking for a tool that basically is on the market for some time, has had a good ecosystem, and at the same time allows for building a headless solution. Because that was something we wanted to achieve. We built Magda Bootroom for it's very much design-driven brand. We knew that this is the solution, and Shopify allowed that. So there wasn't so much competition for Shopify, I would say. So you want to go with a battle-tested approach, and for us the big thing was that also the checkout is creative and it's there, it's working, it's converting, and it for the most like 99% of the time or even more it will work, and it was very very important for us. So that's Shopify. With the Sanity, Sanity actually was a kind of a leap of faith. So we went through a couple of different CMSs. We worked with Prismic, Data CMS, Contentful, and so on. And we always had this feeling that, right, those are good CMSs. You can do a lot with them, but generally speaking, when you're thinking about the editorial experience, you have to think more about how the editor works, and the flow could differ for any particular type of content. So you cannot. So developers tend to simplify things like let's create one flow for everything, or at most two. But it's not how the non-technical people think. So they want to have flows adjusted to the way they work, basically. So and we always found some kind of difficulties using those different CMSs. So and we also very very often we are thinking not how to achieve the best editorial experience, rather than how to go around those limitations. And with Sanity CMS, we just tried it out, and the thing that it's configurable from the core. You starting by building your own schemas. You basically there's nothing pre-programmed for you. That was something that really caught us, and yeah, that was a leap forward. When it comes to different technologies, we have some sort of a tech radar, I would say. So if there is some kind of a new service or technology, we are trying to use it internally first, or of course, research is always first. We read a lot about it, but then we are trying to use on an internal projects, create some POCs and so on. And only then depends on how critical it how critical part it plays in the whole setup. We either recommend it to the client or not. And uh, there's also another side of things. A lot of those technologies, for some reasons, are used already by our clients, and for some reason they want to stay with them, or didn't consider to go with a different technologies, and we just adapting to them, basically.
Does that mean that you have to maintain as well like a lot of legacy?
Uh, I wouldn't say so. No, we generally speaking, a lot of those platforms are quite established production ready platforms. So so in this case, no. Of course, there are some parts that yes, we have to maintain those, but that's the thing with the composability or headless. Those things, if done right, they're quite isolated. So so we don't feel this as a burden, I would say.
I then want to zoom in a bit on how. So most of the people, they obviously, because of Shopify as well, they do a good job, right? They know how a website is built. You have a theme in the online store part of Shopify. You can click the sections and you can make pages. It's like a very user-friendly way of building your website. You actually have the complete freedom to say on a certain day, I want to build this page. And I want to reuse the sections that are there on the whole website to build this specific page, a landing page, a product page, a collection page, whatever kind of page it might be. I think there is like a big question mark from people. Imagine that I go headless. How would that process then look? I think what you have been saying up till this point in time is that with Contentful, you can also, and a headless approach in general, you can also generate that, right? So the code is still the code that decides how a section is built, how a section looks. If you want a new section, you have to develop that section, just like you would have to develop that section in Liquid. But which platform then brings everything together? Can you also see the products that you have in Shopify in that visualizer, if we can call it that? And how does that flow work then? Which system do people then work in? And is it harder that you have to work in two systems? What are like the maybe more nitty gritty? Again, we don't have to dive into it extremely deeply, but like, how does it generally look? And how is that experience for people that don't know the code or that actually are not interested in the fact that it's even a headless setup?
Yeah, definitely the editor in Shopify, the online store 2.0 editor, is quite great. Actually, a lot of headless CMSs don't do it don't do such a great job as Shopify did there. But on the same hand, it's quite generic, and it works on, as you mentioned, on this referential paradigm. So you always referencing some kind of content, and for non-technical people, that tends to be a bit more complicated. And so now we can jump to this headless CMS. So the short answer is yes, you can create something like that, and in my opinion, even better, because basically headless CMSs tend to be more flexible and especially Sanity. So one thing is that you are building this page builder or site builder with the sections, with a live preview, and so on, and that's totally achievable. Another thing is that, for example, you want to structure your main navigation inside the CMS to basically work with your business flow. So, for example, you don't want to. So when the editor wants to, for example, add a new journal post, you just want to have a journal inside the main navigation. So it's obvious where you have to go. The same goes with, every entity that you're, or business entity that you have. So you can adjust those inside the CMS and make the tool seem to be, or actually be be created particularly to your needs, not like a generic, admin panel as, for example, in Shopify. So that's one thing. Another thing is that, those, for example, so Shopify is really great e-commerce platform, and they do a great job when it comes to editing. But what those headless CMS do better, I think, is that they're working in a structured content, and they're very good about it. They're very good about how, for example, images are handled. What are the possibilities? They can afford that, and this is their main focus actually. How you edit content, how you add images, how you crop them, how you set up the hotspots, and so on, and so on. So this will be always something that will be very hard to Shopify, for example, to achieve, whereas their focus is solely on that. Uh, so you've also asked about the products, how that works. So uh, the mm, the mental model we have around this is that Shopify is all about the e-commerce. It's an e-commerce platform. It's a PIM, and the Sanity is more about the territorial data. But so every crucial data about the product that is used for the e-commerce purposes is being kept on the Shopify side of things. When you want to expand the editorial side of things, that's where the Sanity kicks in. And those products and collections are being automatically synced to the Sanity. So you see those inside the CMS, and the so the great thing about this is that works out of the box basically with an application for Shopify, and basically Shopify invested into the Sanity. So that's a very interesting thing, and you can use Sanity actually in right now in a liquid. Yeah, so they synchronize this both ways.
Does this mean, just a small question again, if it's too deep, the question, and if it's like a really hard line to draw, no problem. But like, do you then use meta fields for for products specifically in Shopify with such a setup, or never, because that's for you more editorial type of content? So do you still like also use a bit of meta fields, or is that all information that you just drag into Sanity?
No, we definitely use metafield. So our rule of thumb is that, okay, if this is e-commerce data, will it be used only will it be used across multi-channel or omni-channel? Will it be used only on a website? So every data that we think that basically belongs to the product. A good example could be, for example, technical features. Should it be a CMS responsibility or a Shopify? So we feel like this data could be valuable for all of the marketing tools, all of the integrations. Maybe you want to use that in your email marketing. Maybe you want to use that on the Facebook level. So we keep that in Shopify, and every data that is strictly editorial, that's a part of the CMS.
Okay. Can I then, maybe because I don't have any experience with that, to be really honest, so because I always make that point, but I didn't really see it yet, like working live. How does Ether use contentful, sorry, now Sanity, next to pushing the editorial data to the website? Does it use it in the stores as well? Or like in other parts where they want to push the editorial content to?
Not yet. Not yet, definitely. But yeah, we are thinking about expanding that. There are ideas there. So right now it's only website basically.
Okay, cool. Yeah, super interesting. Michiel, do you want to ask another CMS related question? Again, it will come up for sure, but I also want to dive into yeah, the more technical server side rendering and stuff discussion. So if you want to,
Yes,
yeah,
I also want to dive more into the technical side of things. So it would be great maybe to move on to maybe more of what you do on the front end. I think it would be interesting to maybe more go into what's hydrogen and the remix. Uh, Maybe later on move on as well, like to the the distinguishing between what is like possible with next.js, but also what you are doing with Liquid and implementation insanity. But maybe let's move first into what's going on with the hydrogen and the
yeah,
remix.
I'll try to frame it as the least technical person. Again, you guys can help me from a technical point of view, obviously, but I'll always try to think about the merchants and how they should consume this kind of content. So Next.js, people, yeah, probably heard about already. It's a framework. It's used in a lot of headless websites. It's React based, right? And it gives you a lot of granularity in how you want to load certain parts, or where you want to make where you want to make sure that the most of the work is actually being done. I'm going to frame it a bit differently. I summarized it actually before we had the meeting a bit more. It's like, from a layman perspective, you have to think about a website. So your viewport is the browser, right? The browser gives you actually in the end the website that you want to go towards. And the question is, where does a lot of the work happen? Is that on the server? What is actually given to the browser? How many things does the browser still need to do to show the user experience that the brand wants to create before it is possible to show? And obviously, all the latencies, all the data that has to come from the different parts, that impacts how fast the website that you want to view or the product that you want to buy is actually shown to you. So there is like a notion which is quite easy to understand, that you render or you make certain things on the server and then push it to the browser, and then think about, okay, but maybe some parts of it are very specific to the client, the person that is really viewing the website, that is very specific or like personal for them. So then you already understand the concept that when something comes to the browser, we want to inject some very specific things to that specific customer. So then the website needs to change a bit more dynamically, so that you can view your personalized user experience. Obviously, you understand that, okay, then some things need to happen on the server, it needs to be sent to the browser, then some additional things needs to happen, and then you have the experience that you want people to see. On a liquid point of, or from a liquid point of view, or from the Shopify point of view and the native solution, there are not a lot of things that we can actually adjust. It's just like every time a customer comes on the website, I think, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, you go to a server and you actually ask for all the files. And the server builds the HTML and it gives it back to the browser. Then again, the additional layers are added on top of it, and you start to see the website. That's actually, there is not a lot that developers from a technical point of view can do to make sure that that is optimized, where things are rendered, if you get the nicely built HTML back to the browser so that the browser doesn't need to do a lot of work anymore. While with Next.js, and again, we are going to talk about that after the Next.js discussion, Hydrogen actually gives you so many options to optimize every single step of the process that I was just mentioning. And so, indeed, then terms like server-side generation or static site generation, server-side rendering, sorry, and static site generation come up, because those are terms that are used a lot in the headless infrastructure way. Can you guys both like talk a bit more about why they are so important and how come they have such an impact on the performance? And can you indeed maybe both contrast that with the granularity that you can use if you just use a normal liquid setup? More, maybe first question, is it more or less right what I said? Obviously we don't have to go into details, right? Because you can probably like talk 10 or 20 hours about exactly what I just said, but like more or less from a very high level perspective.
Yeah, John, I think your summary was really good, and you mentioned actually a really important thing. Like when you go with Liquid, for example, you don't have the server runtime, so you don't have possibility to adjust any of the how the so the data is being rendered and sent to the client, but you don't control how it's sent, when it's sent, and so on and so on. Whereas with the Next.js, with other frameworks, you have that control. And yeah, why it's important for me? It's generally like the server side rendering SSG or SSR, CSR. Now, sorry, not CSR, the React Server components. I think the biggest thing about that is, one thing is definitely performance, another thing is C optimization. So that's what the bots like to see. So they like to get a structured document. And for non-technical people, I would say that there is this client, when you have this client generated applications, and when you starting building your composable architecture, you have very much different services around. And in the middle, there is this your application, your storefront. So you start fetching some data from one service, from Algolia, let's say, from your CMS, from Shopify, and so on. And this can happen with a client-side application only when you enter the site. So you start getting data from there. There's a lot of things happening, and for a long time, you see just a blank page or maybe a part of the page. Everything's loading. If you've done a good job, there's not so many layout shifts, but generally a lot of things are happening there. Where with this server side rendering, you can put that on a server. You can decide, okay, this service is pretty slow. Let me fetch it periodically and just keep it in memory or keep it ready for being sent. And yeah, there you have it there. So you ask for the data, it's just there, it's just waiting to be fetched. And when the user enters the site, sees the whole site almost instantly without any work to be done. So that is something that you can only achieve when you control the server environment. You can decide how to communicate with all of those endpoints.
So yeah, okay, perfect. Yeah, it's actually a nice, very nice explanation. So for me, as like a non-technical person, what you would say is, instead of letting the client do a lot of work, because all of those data points come from all of these different services potentially, and then the browser needs to like put it together. a lot of the things are already done by the server, where everything comes together, so that it's already a bit easier when it is sent to the client/browser, for it to be easier to consume.
I think like a good analogy for the client side rendering versus the server side rendering, it's a bit like the IKEA furniture. Um, Instead of like receiving a box that you have to like put in, like you do the screws and the bolts yourself. That would be more like client side. You would just get like all of the different parts in one box, and you have to still build like the furniture yourself. With server side rendering, you basically get like the complete like furniture as a whole piece already put in together with all of the screws and bolts already tightened. Yes. um, and for me as well, like it's very interesting what the community is doing around the different versions of server side rendering, with the static generation on the server, and now also Next.js, I think, introduced with the next version 12, introduced like the incremental server side rendering. um, it's such a game changer, because what we had
Those
before
are
is
the server components that you're talking about right now, right? Or not? No.
it's not a server component yet. Server components is still like a step, like the next thing, I assume. No, but the server side rendering was like a big game changer, because you could have the each page already like static, like as HTML sent to the client. And uh, one of the big drawbacks that we saw as well with one of our clients is that once you have like a big system where you have a lot of products or a lot of pages, once you update only one page, all of the pages need to be generated again. And I think that's the big advantage with incremental server-side rendering is you don't have these long build pipelines anymore. Um, they just every hour, it's like it's a way of caching. Like you can adjust the time of where you keep like a certain page statically on the server, and for example, every hour it just refreshes all of its data. Therefore, also like lowering the load on all of your systems to fetch all of its data to build a certain page. Um, and performance wise, you still have like the advantages of a static page.
But then I think like the hard concept for people to understand is like, okay, you can make it as static as you potentially want, but this is still an e-commerce website, right? A lot of things need to be dynamic still. Maybe we could just make that even more understandable for people. What are the typical things that should be or are dynamic on e-commerce websites? If we talk about static versus dynamic stuff, I mean, obviously, if you have an article, for example, right? You can just completely statically build it and serve it to the customer, because it's always going to be the same exact article for the millions of people that want to go to that article. But which parts are dynamic if we discuss dynamic things? I'm already thinking about, but I can be wrong. Like reviews, you can have more reviews every a single second, right? You can maybe have some flash sales or some specific stuff for you, because you bought 2 items, for example, and the second item you get 50%. So you want to maybe dynamically show something on your website. Those are the typical examples, right, of dynamic stuff that we discuss. Are there any examples that you want to add that make it even more understandable for people? Or is this like more or less a summary of the typical dynamic stuff that you want to see as an e-commerce entrepreneur?
You somewhat mentioned that already, but I would definitely say explicitly inventory levels. So imagine there is like a big sale and your items just going out of stock in a second, and you have to basically make it in real time. So even if you're refreshing your site on the server every 10 minutes, that would be not enough. But I think that's like a common misunderstanding of those server side rendering or static site rendering. So it doesn't mean that those sites are static. It means more that your first render of the site is statically generated. Whereas the the whole consecutive navigation, the whole functionality of the site is more is working as a client side. So there is nothing stopping you from getting the data, in real time, refresh it whenever you want, or on the user action and so on. So it's a combination of both worlds. So uh, where you're going with the client side rendering, you lose the server side of the things. When you go with the server side of things, you don't lose the client side.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very important. And so maybe just to state that correctly, is it true that like with Liquid, there is only the client side rendering going on and the client side stuff going on? So you cannot impossibly, it's impossible to get or make use from the server side rendering, right? Is that true?
Actually, not. So the first renders is also rendered on the server. So you getting the data from the Shopify database and so on. And so basically, Liquid is a template language. So when you're creating your site, you create your, let's say, heading, like, welcome to my shop, and then you can put some data from the Shopify. Okay, welcome to the shop, and I want to put a shop name here, or I want to show 5 of my best-selling products here. So that's what you're getting from the Shopify, and that's rendered on the server. The only difference being that you don't have any control how this data is obtained, how this data is refreshed, and so on and so on. So the capabilities there are much smaller. So it doesn't mean it's a bad solution. It just means you have much less control over
Exactly.
the whole process.
Cool. That's a very good explanation. Um, so then, in terms of hydrogen, maybe we can jump into that a bit more because it's crazy. I read the article this morning. Obviously, I knew quite a lot about hydrogen already, but I didn't dive into the original or like the origins of it. And they took some big leaps, right? So first, from what I've understood, they wanted to create everything from scratch, more or less, and then the whole remix thing came into the equation. Can you say maybe something about why Shopify would do something like creating hydrogen, and indeed what the technical basis is at this point in time?
Oh, that's a very broad subject. So yeah, generally speaking, yeah. So they started with hydrogen one with a very ambitious approach. So at this point, RSC were very much in, in 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 into the making, basically. So they weren't ready. They 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 there wasn't even like a very good beta version or something like that. And but the hydrogen team, very very skillful people. They said, okay, this is the future. We want to go that way. Let's do our own implementation that somehow will be very very near the React one. And they've actually jumped. I think they jumped to the React implementation later on along the way. But that was very very ambitious task to do.
Yeah, which is crazy, right? So you're talking about the React server components, right? And it was not even a thing yet because the React team still needed to really like release it, right, to production.
There was a lot of discussions. It was in the progress, but it wasn't definitely ready.
And they said this is the future, so we're going to already build our system to incorporate it while it's actually not really there yet.
Yes, but they've also believed in that solutions being the actually a good architectural solution for what they want to achieve. And I think they were right. The thing is that whenever you're building a new framework, you have tremendous job to do it, like in terms of building community, building documentation, and so on. And yeah, going with that experimental route could be very hard, especially with all the things you have to worry about. So I think after 1 year of hydrogen not getting so much traction, they went with Remix actually, and building like at this point a very thin layer about on top of the Remix. So Hydrogen is more like a set of tools, I would say, at this point, adding to the Remix. But I genuinely think that this move was really, really, really a smart one, really thoughtful one, because basically on one hand with investing into the Remix, they already have a community around it. They have a battle tested solution, and it just combines so well, since Remix is all about coming back to the roots, doing things natively to the browser and so on, and it can be very appealing message to all the Liquid developers that are already in the Shopify ecosystem. So in a way, it's always also a good way of basically presenting a new way of writing shops to the existing developers in the space.
Nice. It's crazy. So, but because there are so many questions that I could ask, obviously, but so maybe again for people to understand, like, what is then still the difference between so React builds certain things like the server components. We're going to dive into what is different about those than what we just discussed in terms of server side rendering and static site generation and stuff. But what is then the difference between next.js that also has to build on top of what React has been doing and then Hydrogen?
Yeah, so without going into a lot of technical details, I would say they're very close to each other. So they serve the same purpose. So they're full stack frameworks for building the full stack application, the server client side application. So at this point, the big difference there, I think, is coming from a fact that whenever you're using Next.js or any other framework, and then you may use SwelterKit, for example, you are going with Vercel or Netlify or AWS and so on. But this is something that is not that promoted, not promoted that much. But what Shopify did is also they built their own platform. So Oxygen. So
Their hosting solution, right?
it's a hosting solution built inside the Shopify, and that's another very thoughtful move, I think. So they own the server runtime. They can do a lot of things around it. Maybe I will get back to that in a second. But generally speaking, they've done those two products. So one thing is, of course, this psychological barrier. You don't have to you don't have to use outside tools. You're still in the Shopify ecosystem, and you can build headless solutions. So we have Hydrogen, we have Oxygen. It also takes some operational complexity out of the whole equation. So you don't have to maintain different versions and so on. You don't have to buy another platform like Versa or Netlify. You just have one bill for the Shopify. So that's one thing. Another thing is by that, and it's not there yet. I'm really, really waiting for that. So on their roadmap, it wasn't, bolded very much or announced very much, but there was one sentence that caught my eye. They said something about gradually adapting the sites from Liquid to Remix.
I saw that in your article. I wanted to ask a question about that as well. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a big part. If they will achieve that, I think that's a game changer for the Shopify, because right now that's the biggest roadblock for going headless for many brands. Okay, I have to make this investment. Mm, and maybe I just want to, start with a product page, which is most converting one. That page be a headless, and great. And let's start from there and let's see what happens. And if Shopify team will achieve that, yeah, that's a game changer there. And I think building an oxygen solution is is partially about that. So they are owning the environment. Uh, they could theoretically, of course, build an abstractions that allow you to have your both sides on in one ecosystem and have some kind of a redirection mechanism between them, and maybe even allow to share a session between them, between those two solutions, because they are owning the environment. In
Wow.
theory.
Okay, that's incredible. Michiel, what do you think about it?
I I think it's a big game changer because indeed we see a lot of companies they start out with liquid as they're a small company and they grow as the business grow. Also, their needs grow, and I think as we mentioned in the beginning of the conversation about the different kind of tools that you want to implement. Um, if you're inside of a monolith, it's difficult to have those experimentations or try out new tools that are specifically needed for your business use case. Having the option to go from one system and going into the headless system and have all of the flexibility, it's going to be a big game changer. And I see a lot of shops going from like a small e-commerce to like the mid markets to even like enterprise, making the switch to the headless approach.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that would be really. I read exactly that one sentence in your article. I was like, wow. So when did you actually read that sentence, and from which statement is that? When? Why might we be more informed about if you're right or not?
Yeah, so that was actually official roadmap or announcement of a roadmap for Hydrogen 2. I didn't hear anything about it yet after the official release, but yeah, I'm looking very closely.
Cool. Okay, very cool. Then maybe both of you, so like the React server components. Yeah, I mean, enlighten us. What are they then? Again, like high level compared to the more technical, in-depth discussion that we had. Um, Server side rendering and then static site generation and stuff. Why are the React server components so important? Maybe to give like a little side note again, this might not be super relevant for merchants themselves, but I think that Next.js went from version 12 to version 13, and in version 13 they added this game changer, so to say. And it also had impact on how you should structure your directory and how you should structure your code, etc. So why is this? Why is this such a big game changer? Why are they just coming up with this right now? Why could it even more accelerate the user experience for merchants than the tools that we had before?
It's maybe before you answer, it's maybe also nice to make the link with the remix, since I think Next.js, we say in Dutch, I think got their butter from somewhere else. Next.js didn't came up with the whole new layout system. It's a beautiful piece of technology that I think Remix first came out with. So
I had no clue.
maybe
Okay.
it's maybe nice to make the link
Acknowledge
between the
that.
two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so go ahead. Who's first?
Yeah, sure. Miguel, please go.
Oh, okay. So I think one of the things that Remix was very game changer is they made it possible for certain parts of your web application um, to already display once the data is already fetched, and for certain pieces that the data takes a longer time to being fetched to the client, they show like a loading state. So your web page uh, is like building up as the data is coming in, but you don't have to wait until all of the data is ready to display it all at once. So you see partially pieces of the page building up. I think Facebook has also done a lot of optimizations with how they show the Facebook feed. So all of the navigation is already present, but the feed takes longer to fetch the data. So therefore, that part of the content is shown later, right? And Remix was able to build like a similar way of fetching data. Um, and with Next version 13.2, Next.js also implemented a similar kind of technology where you load parts of the layout uh, according to when the data is coming in. And then the server components, maybe Michael, you can go into more depth because it's a fairly new technology and it's also very new for me as well.
Yeah, so definitely from a technical point of view, I don't feel so much comfortable going, into so much detail, but it's basically uh, allow you to stream every component down from the server to the client in a partial way. So I would approach this in comparison with an SSG or SSR. So I feel like most of the e-commerce sites right now are built that most of the sites are built as or are statically generated. Then maybe some of the sites are actually server side rendered. The the difference there is subtle, but it's there. So statically generated site means that okay, you have so the site is being built periodically and it waits in the server, and if somebody asks, it's being rendered back. It's being sent back to the user. The server side or SSR is basically rendered on the request on the server. So you can of course cache it and make it more like a static generated and so on. But generally speaking, that's the difference. So the big thing is that both of those paradigms actually or in the next.js implementation, puts you into the mode that you have to fetch the data on the top level, basically on the server, because they have to know how to generate the props. Whereas using the React server components, you can send just the parts of your site to the client. So, for example, let's say you want to just send the just send the first section. So we render something quickly, and then you can start sending less important content later on. And every of this content can now fetch its own data, and it's in some way it's a closed module that okay, I need this and this data to render. I'm ready. I'm sending. And the best part of it that every part of the site could be, for example, cached differently. So let's say this section should be updated in real time. So something that we'll do with servers, static generated site, will be updating those on the client, whereas with the server components, we can update this on the server and do it periodically, caching it and so on, which is making the whole code base actually easier. Like uh, we can actually just call to the server, okay, please revalidate everything. So or revalidate this component, and those changes will be sent to the client. Another thing is that with this granular or now the whole fetching mechanism being on a component level, you you can talk with a server basically. So okay, you don't need a so big client bundle to actually start fetching things because you don't have to do it. You just go to the server and say, okay, please refresh the data and give me the newest one. So every every package that you are using, every library that you are using can actually sit on the server, and you have a minimal bundle there. And one thing that, because from a technical point of view, that it's a pretty new concept. We still have to, or the community still have to come with all of the best practices around it and so on. It's being visible, for example, in next.js. Like, people are just struggling for the information of how they should approach common tasks or common problems, how to solve them. But from a non-technical point of view, I would say, I think that the biggest thing is that because with static site generation, that the thing is that we are building the site and it's sitting on the server and waiting for being requested, is that personalization is pretty hard to achieve. And it's basically personalization, or every, I just want to have a different version of the site for a different segment of the client. And that's pretty hard to achieve, because basically you have to build 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of the site waiting there. And what if you have 2 factors? So you have to,
it doubles up again, exponentially.
again and so on. And the complexity just grows there. It's still possible, and it's still very, very good. For example, A/B testing, you can do it very, very performantly using that solution. But the maintenance cost increased significantly. Whereas with this solution, with React Server Components, theoretically you can build a strategy that allow you to make very performant sites, almost as fast as static ones, or as fast as static ones, with this dynamic possibilities.
Crazy. Well, I'm going to summarize it. Maybe there is a lot of mistakes in it, but like for me, it's a bit interesting where also the names come from, right? Because it's like static site generation or whatever. So from what I have seen, like before, when I was young, you built a whole page in HTML and with CSS and stuff, and then you have the concept of a page, and a page needs to load. But now that we are, and for me, I've been introduced in the or via the Shopify customizer. Now it's not really about pages anymore. It's about sections, and you have specific sections that you use on specific pages. So it's like again a composable way of thinking about things. You first have the APIs and the microservices, and then you have the sections. So everything is like build up in like smaller and smaller parts. And for me personally, how I view this conceptually, this whole thing about static site generation and React server components, is that now you can, instead of seeing it from a page or a whole website point of view, you actually see it from a section point of view, that you can choose within a section how you want to load it and how that section is typically viewed or typically built up. And so for me, it's like a way of like being able to component or section wise, and however you want to define a section or a component, if that's a microservice or if that's a front end section on your website or page, you can choose whatever thing you want, how it's rendered, where it's rendered, and how you want to achieve like putting it together to make a page and to make a user experience. So it's, for me, it's kind of cool from that perspective, because it's a trend that you can like draw through all of the things that I just said. And it's quite amazing actually when you think about it, that it's evolving in that way. Maybe I should just give like the nods or the nays for the technical people, like, no, you didn't get anything right. But that's from my perspective how I see it.
I think, like, of course we can argue a lot about all of the technical details and nooks and crannies around that, but generally speaking, it's a next step when it comes to server side rendering. We know that the server, like the front end, doesn't mean only client. We're just going more into the server. There is this overall joke around the RSC that it's just PHP. And yeah, and we should rename React to PHP and so on. But yeah, that's with all of the ecosystem and easiness of how we build front-end applications using React or generate JavaScript. Uh, being in PHP with that isn't a bad thing. Like there are good things that PHP done well, really. So and the whole paradigm on and having this mature API to communicate through the server in this very natural way, because you've mentioned that you're thinking more in terms of sections or more in terms of components. So why not to develop them like so? So okay, this section needs this kind of data, so it will actually the whole logic will live there.
Yeah, and now you can talk to the server about that specific section like you would like in the PHP days, right? Because PHP is like, yeah, you can conversate with the server more, right? It's like a language that the server like readily understands or like directly understands, right? That's more or less it.
More or less, yeah.
Exactly, more or less. Cool. Maybe I want to ask like a general question. Then again, it might be super hard to like have a concrete answer around it, but I just want to ask the question because again, this is a podcast also for merchants if they are able to listen that long to three technical people in a podcast, obviously. But um, when we think about headless, and obviously the point that you made already about making sure that you can um, already get parts of your website on a headless setup, it's a huge game changer indeed. But can we draw a line or like think together about if we would if people would be interested in building on Shopify and keeping building on Shopify, and if it would not be a conceptual issue for them that they would invest even more into the Shopify ecosystem, and it would just be important to them to make sure that they can build a fast and performance user experience. If you compare a Next.js setup with a Vercel or a Netlify versus doing it on Hydrogen and Oxygen, how would we think about maintenance and initial build costs? Can we say something about that? Will that be more or less the same? Or will that be a factor of 50% less costly potentially? Or will it be 10x less costly? I mean, can we say something about the different levers, the different buttons that we can push to make sure that such a project becomes more palatable or more acceptable for customers to go into? Can we say something about that, or is it too early, or is it just too hard because it's case specific? Or can we actually say something very broadly about it?
I think, generally speaking, it's a bit too early to come with a conclusion as such that some one of the solutions is much faster than the other. Uh, Definitely, Next.js is much wider recognizable framework with a much bigger community around it. So it got some upper hand there, but on the other hand, they introduce new paradigm, and everybody's is are getting their hand around it. So that's that. On the other hand, we have a remix, which is also a battle tested solution to some extent. And when it comes to Shopify itself or the hydrogen part, I think like Shopify has a very it's in a very delicate situation. Like they have to maintain a balance between not locking up the hydrogen and basically earning trust of a development community, which generally speaking don't like this kind of closing features. And on the other hand, they have to bring some value proposition to the hydrogen. So at this point in time, it's those two solutions are very similar, and I think choosing between those two boils down to more what are your developers think more comfortable about. Do you have mm, any business flows or integrations or needs that will require a more complicated solution on a hosting side of things? Because we can assume that Verisor or solution solutions like Versa or Netlify will be much more open than the Oxygen. So even in terms of your product structure, so for example, if you are using a monorepo, you cannot use it on Oxygen. It just works with defined project structure. So things like that. If you know that you will be maintaining a couple of different applications for your whole ecosystem, you want to do that in a monorepo and so on. Maybe there is a better for you. The better solution would be to go with some outside platform like Versa, Netlify, and in this case, for example, Next.js. But yeah, there is no simple answer there.
Yeah, but it's an interesting approach. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, and Shopify actually, with the release of Hydrogen Remix, they also released Hydrogen React library, which basically is a set of components and hooks for handling the common logic of our common components into Shopify. And this package is meant to be used in the next.js projects or different React projects. So they basically they maintaining this delicate balance there. And I'm not saying at this point the decision is not obvious. I would say there are a couple of smaller things there. Like one thing that we notice is that, for example, you it wasn't I wouldn't say it wasn't impossible, but it wasn't easy to do analytics. Like you have a headless solution and you want to have a Shopify analytics in the panel for a headless solution. Technically it was possible, but without the documentation, without the internal knowledge, it was actually not. So, and that's what was that is what you're getting for free with Hydrogen and React and so on. And yeah, right now with the Hydrogen React package, you can do that in Next.js and so on. But there was a point you couldn't do that. So yeah, they are not locking up some features, but some of the internal mechanisms are easier to grasp in Hydrogen Remix.
Interesting.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend any of the solution right now with 100% certainty that okay, this is the way to go.
Cool. Nice.
For me, it always felt like hydrogen. Um, it's like playing bowling with the guardrails. Uh, and like if you just prefer to play the regular way, you go with Next.js, because in a way, hydrogen gives you a lot of these predefined components and helping you like with a very opinioned way of building the store, whereas with Next.js you have all of the freedom, um, and I think therefore like it's a good solution. I think you will have like a lot of benefit of using like the components that's already there, like in development time. um, but it was a very strategical move, like a great strategic move of the team of Shopify to also come out with the React components with Hydrogen, because as you said, the community is there's a big difference in the community. The community with React and Next.js is so huge at the moment. It's a lot easier to also find people who have already experience with Next.js.
Yeah, and that's why I'm actually asking the question as well, right? Because I mean, from a merchant perspective, we can have the technical discussions as long as we want, but for them, it's indeed also very important to understand how much agency lock-in or indeed tech stack lock-in they would have if they choose option one versus the other option. So that's why I just want to untangle all of these things, because obviously the lock-in question is based in the question of how big the community is and who can develop on what platforms and on what frameworks. So it's indeed, it's just it seems like it's a pivotal moment, and obviously the current community around Next.js and React and stuff is bigger than the Hydrogen part. But indeed, who knows that if they keep it open enough and if they keep it like interesting enough for the more Next.js, for the people that are more in the Next.js community to also be able to get into the hydrogen community, yeah, then probably the lock-in won't be that huge, which makes it better for merchants or easier for merchants to choose that solution as well. So yeah, it's just super interesting to see it all evolve. And I actually didn't have a clue that it was such a pivotal moment for all of these technologies, and even on the Next.js side of things, right? Because we say it's a paradigm shift there. So even there are a lot of things going on, and it's a new way of thinking. So it's crazy how like both systems or ecosystems or communities are like in a really interesting state at this point in time. So probably we'll have to do another podcast in like a year or something to like revert and see like, oh, where did it actually go? It would be interesting to see. Yeah, cool. I think we're more or less ending because we've been talking for 1 hour and 40 minutes already, more or less, or 1 hour and a half. Are there any like big topics that we still want to discuss? Maybe Michal, we can just start with, because I obviously prepared some outro kind of questions, and you actually had some quite interesting responses on them already. So what are you personally super excited about in the next couple of years? That's, I think, an interesting topic to pick on.
Yeah, all right. So I think there can't be a podcast in 2023 without mentioning AI.
There we go. First time, I think it's indeed a record these
Yeah,
days.
after almost 2 hours, but there. Yeah, so definitely AI. That's something that I think. Yeah, everybody's excited about that. But there's a couple of things generally. So even from a data point of view, I think that's also an interesting thing that right now we are gathering a lot of data, and I think a bigger, more enterprise brands are actually have the resources to analyze this kind of a data. It isn't something that I see mid-market brands are doing. So I think there's this notion that everybody understands right now that okay, we have to collect as much data as possible, like through the analytics, through tools like Hotjar, Clarity, and so on, e-commerce data. So I think we are already there, that we need to collect the data, but I see that a lot of those brands doesn't actually have the resources or internal knowledge how to analyze this data, how to act upon it. And basically, so it's building, this kind of a feeling of a safety that okay, we are collecting the data. The other thing is how to act, how to okay, maybe we prepared A/B testing, but how to actually analyze the data there. And I'm slowly seeing more and more AI tools there, and I think that's a really great direction. So AI generated insights or AI generated suggestions how to act, where to proceed. That's a big thing there, and actually a way for those companies to start using data they collected. So okay, I can see that I have 15 rage clicks on my add to cart button, but what's now? What are other brands doing? What are the best practices there? Should I call developers? What kind of a company could help me solve that problem? So this is something that this AI is basically would be very good to add it. And I saw a great example of that. So our partners from Shadow to Vermont, they've done a really great application for Shopify that basically analyzes all of the user server inquiries that you have and provide you with insights. So a very quick summary of what they think is wrong, what they think is good, and so on and so on, in this printable way. So this direction is very 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 interesting for me. Another thing, and this is more like um, food for thought thing. I'm genuinely thinking that the rise of AI will bring smaller brands, will bring them much closer uh, to big established brands in terms of marketing power. So right now, a big part of the marketing is basically budget. You can operate, you can spend on photo shoots and so on. And imagine doing a photo shoot only in front of your computer and generating it, and not going to some tropical island with 20 people and doing the actual photo shoot there.
Yeah, I wonder how the ether. So we started this discussion how these guys look at that, right? Because they are from a cinematographic background. So I wonder how they are going to approach this. It's indeed super interesting. It brings the tools that indeed would be a big difference between the crazy brands that have a lot of money to spend. It would bring the smaller brands closer to what the big brands can do there, right? Yeah. So that's it's interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. It's cool. I want to pick maybe just like a minute on the whole data and and AI thing, because indeed what we see a lot is that you can get a lot of data from all the different services that you use. But a lot of times in e-commerce, it's also very unstructured, and it's a bit like you get shit data in and you get shit data out, or you get shit AI out, because your data is not structured in a nice way. And so one of the things that we have been, or people or companies that we have been working with, is Run Converge. It's like it's like an analytics platform that actually aggregates all the different data sources and tries to structure it very nicely. So you can have a structured data source to maybe in the future build up some AI things around. So that's, I think, a really indeed interesting topic. Because you can have a huge data lake where you just let everything flow in, but if it's not structured at all, I mean, it's very hard to actually get something out of it, and it probably for smaller brands is not worth your time and money to get that data lake up and running if you just push in unstructured data. Because it will only maybe serve you in in years if you're able to get somebody on there or an AI to make sure that it is structured and you can get some results out of it. So there is indeed a lot happening there as well, in terms of the different services and tools that you can use. So that's super cool. Michiel, you want to join in about the AI stuff or the data stuff for a second, or
Um, well, it's such a broad topic because it's gonna be like influential on so many levels, and I feel that at this moment, um, there's we still have not like come up with all of the places that it's going to have such a huge impact in. But I do agree with what Michael says, that you're like leveling out the playing field, and like budget won't be the only differentiating factor between like a small or a big brand. You have like access to so many uh, like new knowledge or like new creativity just because you have the AI tools. So I'm very curious to see what's going to happen in this space. Yes.
cool. And then maybe one last question. Maybe we can talk about it a bit as well, but maybe it's short. What would you like in terms of Shopify features? You actually had an interesting answer about that as well, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we talked about the possible one of the possible features of the AI. So this one I will keep really down to earth. So definitely something that is causing so much work around or workarounds around it is that definitely a bigger number of options. So Shopify could support more advanced products or product configurators in a much easier way. Um, Another would be another small one is adding a native gallery to the variants. So that is also that historically it cost merchants a lot of work, like it's very common to create something called product color or color product. So generally speaking, a product for different products for the same product, just to accommodate different galleries. You can get around it using meta fields, but it's just not so convenient right now.
So they should up the. I think the options are 3, right, per product. So they should up that for sure. And then you can only have like 100 variants per product.
Yeah. You can't imagine how many times we sat with development team and we calculated, okay, if we are above the limit and or not. So that is something crazy there. With not so down to earth things, and this is a broad topic on itself. I really like what they're doing with actually componentizing their system, opening up the system with Shopify functions, and I would like to see a future development of those. We are actually developing new solutions for our clients using those, and they're working really, really well. Right now, we are building more complex discount flows, and this is something we already started showing that to our clients, and being able to build a custom solution like that inside the Shopify with a native feeling, that is something really, really great.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, if they really open this up and make sure that you can make your custom discount flows. I mean, because those have such a big impact potentially on conversion and on real revenue increase, right? I mean, it's just such a awesome change. And it has been there now for a couple of months. So yeah, it's cool to. I mean, for Shopify Plus customers, obviously the custom solutions, but the apps will come to the market as well for the other Shopify plans. So it will be cool to see those popping up everywhere.
Definitely. And one last thing would be server analytics. That is something that everybody struggles with, how to do analytics well in the Shopify, especially in headless solutions. And server pixels or server analytics, that is something that actually was announced in the winter editions on Shopify. I really waiting for those.
Yeah, cool. And the bundles as well. This is something that we're also waiting for, the native bundling stuff. It would be cool as well. Yeah, thanks so much. It's been a great talk, very long. I wouldn't have assumed that it would have taken so long, but it's so crazy the amount of topics I think that we have touched upon. So that's probably the reason, because it was so broad, that we spent so much time on it. But thanks so much for making time. Thanks so much for all of the insightful insights. I really hope that we can do it again, because again, it's an extremely pivotal moment in all of the ecosystems that we have been covering. So who knows? We'll be back in a year or something when a lot of stuff has happened. So thanks both of the Michiel, Michael people involved in the discussion, and it was really great to meet you. Thanks a lot.
It was really great. Thank you, and hopefully see you in a year.
Yes. Thank you.
Awesome.